Walking Without Skin, Managing Adversity with Vulnerability.
Pain is wrong, every inch of my heart like an open wound. I can't go on, I'll drown if I don't stop the bleeding soon.
I did do a lot of paintings, which I feel that they were kind of more like my art therapy. So I did a whole bunch of paintings that were really just for me. They were just me trying to process, what had happened to me, like what the kind of emotional ramifications.
Where can I find some protection to prevent this ongoing infection?
You are listening to Walking Without Skin, the show where we encourage our guests to be vulnerable, to share their voices with authenticity, to tell their stories from the heart. We will talk about hope and recovery, about overcoming loss, changes, challenges, and adversities. We will walk without skin.
How will I know when it's safer? When every step feels like sandpaper. I'm walking without skin. I'm walking without skin.
And here is your host, Lois Wagner.
Hi, I am Lois, your friend for forgiveness and the creator of Walking Without Skin. I have a book with the same title, Walking Without Skin. And welcome back to another episode of Walking Without Skin. Today, I have the pleasure of chatting to Raven Kaliana. Hi, Raven.
Hello.
Great to have you here. Raven and I have had interactions before, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Raven Kaliana directs Puppet Revolution Theatre Company, producing puppet-based plays and films for adults and teens on social issues. She presented Hooray for Hollywood, her award-winning autobiographical film on surviving human trafficking at a UN Geneva, New York Commission on the Status of Women, London City Hall. This is a very interesting story. But before we get into your story, Raven, can you please tell me what you understand by the term walking without skin?
Well, I would think that it probably means being present and open to your surroundings. I imagine it probably means, or this is what it would mean to me, that it means trying to be connected to the present moment rather than letting old messages and fears kind of override your responses. That would be my interpretation anyway.
No, that's great. Thank you. So what got you into puppetry? How did you start this journey?
Oh yes, puppets are a great love of mine. After I graduated from university, I moved to San Francisco, California, and I didn't have any jobs lined up. I was just sort of a went on whimsy. And when I got there, I just was taking, I was quite young, so I was just taking temporary administrative jobs. And one day I got a call, and the people were laughing in the background of this agency, and I was like, why are they laughing? And then the woman on the phone said, do you like puppets? And I was like, yes. And she's like, well, we may have an opportunity for you. I was like, okay. And then it turned out that the company was looking for a permanent employee, not even a temporary employee, but a permanent employee. And anyway, they hired me. I love them. They love me. And it was an amazing place to work. It's a family-run business. It's called Folkmanis Puppets, and it was just life-changing. I mean, I can't even I get quite emotional talking about it because it really was like, in some ways, I mean, it was such a joy to work there, just day to day, just being part of this amazing team. And they were creating like such beautiful, beautiful, amazing, well thought out, well made puppets. And everybody, you know, when I went out, you know, performing with them, you know, I got such incredibly positive feedback from them. And also I saw that adults love puppets. I mean, it's a funny thing because you know, you think of it as being like a medium for children, but it's like, no, I think it's for adults, because adults really need to have their imagination reawakened. They really need to be reminded that they have permission to play, that that things don't have to be in this regimented way, that they can just do something, you know, kind of spur of the moment and exciting and fun. Anyway, I do love puppets so much, and it went on from that. I worked there for a few years until I realized, oh, right, actually, puppetry would be the perfect medium for my story. And I'd never considered that before. I'd never, you know, really, I wasn't into theater when I was young or anything like that. I was just like, didn't picture myself doing that. But then I realized it would be the perfect medium because it would protect me. It would be easier to have this kind of one step removed way of telling the story. And it would be easier for the audiences as well, because here's this metaphorical, magical world that's created on stage, and they can connect with that rather than just having the raw, you know, terrifying story of what went on when I was a child.
Had you ever told your story before that?
Oh, many times indeed. But I told it not so publicly. You know, I told, you know, I had loads of friends who were other survivors of very similar crimes. And it was very validating. It was kind of like a chosen family for me, that, you know, all this community of other survivors. And it was empowering because, you know, I could see, you know, kind of the trajectory or the journey of healing. And so I had so many other examples of people, different places on their paths, you know, confronting different issues. And it was just very heartening. So, yes, I told my story, many parts of my story, to many different people, you know, over many years. And so the puppetry, what I wanted to do with the puppetry was to make it a public conversation, and not about, you know, just me, but actually about the issue itself, and how can we change things politically, legally, socially, what needs to change in order to stop these crimes. And that was the conversation I wanted to have with the world, really. And I moved from California to England in order to produce my autobiographical play, Hooray for Hollywood, which I did in 2008. And then I made it into a film in 2011. And that was mainly for safety reasons, because a lot of the things that happened to me happened in California. You know, things that happened when I was growing up, a lot of the crimes and the criminal networks were still in California, and I didn't want to be harassed while I was speaking out. So England was a much safer and better choice for me, and it's a good place for me to be. It's very supportive of theater. There's loads of kind of social initiatives here. It's a good place for me to be.
Could you briefly tell us what your story is and what is included in the film?
Well, Hooray for Hollywood is basically just shows just a few snapshots along the way of what happened to me when I was a kid. So I was exploited and trafficked by my family. my family was involved with a local pedophile ring, and some of those people had links to a much larger organized crime ring. And when I was an infant, my dad, started taking, horrible photos of the sexual abuse that he was doing to me and selling this to his friends in this network. And then it cascaded from there. And the first memory that I have of actually being taken away from home to a professional photo studio for the purpose of child sexual exploitation photos was, I think I was about 4 years old, and my family was meeting up with this other family, and they were also bringing their child, and we were abused together by a grown man who was also running the camera. And it was just a horrific experience, and it was something that's that some people find a bit shocking, because this photo studio was in a department store, it was in the basement, but it was basically, there's like a little, it's not so common these days, but when I was growing up, there were when it was film instead of digital, there was a there would often be in larger stores like a family photo studio where it's like, oh, you could take your child to be professionally photographed, and then you get these prints, and then you cut out these little prints and you send them on to your relatives at Christmas or something. And it was one of those type of setups, except that there was stairs that went down to the basement. And so you entered through the photo studio where, the normal photographs were happening. And then you took the stairs down to the basement, and some other types of photos were being taken. So, so part of what I wanted to communicate through Hooray for Hollywood is that these are crimes that it's oftentimes the child's family that's involved in selling the child and exploiting the child, because it's the adults that are closest to the child have that child's trust, the child's dependent on them, they have access. If they, anyway, we won't necessarily go into their motives, but it's like, oftentimes if there's a history of abuse in that family, the adults often have a lot of denial about what they're doing. So my parents were constantly just rationalizing what they were doing, but they were, I went to school, it's like, it wasn't like I was kidnapped. I had a home, we had dogs, cats, we ate at the dinner table together, and then they sent me off, to these places. And when I came back and I was all shattered and bruised and injured, then I'd have to, my mother might clean me up a little bit and then not take me to the hospital, but send me to school on Monday, where I would have to pretend that nothing was wrong. And I dissociated a lot of that so that I just blocked it out, because it was just too overwhelming. I couldn't emotionally or mentally cope with it. So many years passed of that, and what happened was, when I was about 12 or so, I started to look like a 12-year-old. And apparently that means, in the pedophile world, apparently that means that you're worth less money because they are more interested in younger children. So if you're starting to look like an adult, then your value starts to go down. So my parents couldn't get as much money off of the same sorts of activities, and there was less demand. So my dad was faced with having to go get a normal job, and he was just so scared he didn't want to do that. And my mother just went and got a normal job. And so she was like, just like, all right, stop it, But my dad was like, oh no, I've got a plan. And he actually, well, first I was put into more and more dangerous situations. Really absolutely horrific, life-threatening abuse, gang rape, torture, films where I had to witness other children getting murdered in front of me. And then finally, my dad found a film, made an arrangement with someone who had some mafia connections and other connections to mainstream Hollywood, unfortunately. And basically, in this film, I was slated to be murdered. And it really came down to the scene where I was meant to be murdered. And I just had this kind of overwhelming adrenaline thing where I fought back, and I managed to get out of the restraints and things that they put me in. And they didn't want, one of the men had a gun, but he didn't want to shoot me because then they wouldn't get the money. So I was meant to die in the way that I was meant to die in that scene. So if they shot me, then they wouldn't get the payout. They wouldn't get paid. So anyway, that gave me a slight, bit of leverage, a slight bit of hesitation on their part. And so I actually got away. I got out of there, and I ran away from that studio. And eventually I went back home. And it's always, people are always like, why did you go back home? I'm like, well, I didn't have anywhere else to go. And living on the streets as, I think I was 14 then, living on the streets as a 14-year-old, what are you going to do? How are you going to survive? It's going to be prostitution, isn't it? So that isn't what I wanted to do with my life. And at home, I could go to school. And it was actually through staying in school that I managed to get away to university eventually, after a long time. It was a teacher that actually really advocated on my behalf and did everything that she could to help me stay in school, because I was a very good student. I studied very hard, but on the other hand, I was absent quite a lot due to my dad just taking me out of state, or sometimes I would have really severe injuries so that I couldn't come to school. And of course, again, my parents didn't take me to hospital. There was a lot of medical neglect. And so, it's miraculous that I, survived all of that. But this teacher was very encouraging. She's just a wonderful person. And basically, she encouraged me to find more resources and tell more people and get the authorities involved. And I did everything that I could to de-isolate myself with these people who are putting me in so much danger. My mother was also a lot, slightly more reasonable than my dad was, but she was also also a direct threat to my life. She threatened me with a gun many times. She's not a safe person. And so this basically, by going off to university, that was how I managed to get away from my family. It was a different city. It was a different. I kind of found a new circle of friends, got into some support groups, got into counseling, and just was able to find actually quite a lot of other survivor friends at that time. And it was also coincided with the time where just culturally things started to shift a little bit, and actually survivors were starting to tell their stories more. And I was like collecting like these magazines and stuff. I'm like, look, somebody else has spoken up about this. I was so excited. And so it was just it was a kind of a, zeitgeist kind of thing where I suddenly had a little bit more support, in the world for me to heal and get away and to be safe. And there was a point where actually things shifted, and even the harassment mostly like fell off, and that was like, I'm safe. I'm actually safe, and I saved my own life, and I get to do whatever I want with my own life. And so it was just this new beginning for me. And then it was, a few years later, I got this job at Pocahontas Puppets, and moving to California was a great thing for me. So I kind of got to redo my childhood in some ways, because it basically I had like a new sort of definition of family that was much healthier, much more supportive, and fun.
What a horrific story, and I'm just so grateful that you managed to survive that terrible, terrible experience. Raven, and your parents today?
Well, I don't know. I haven't been in contact with them, since I escaped. So, I escaped in my very early 20s. I don't know.
You've never wanted to confront them, talk to them about it?
Well, I confronted them in my entire teenage years, but what are you going to do when somebody puts a gun in your face? What are you going to do when somebody kidnaps you and drugs you? So it's like staying in contact with them would be staying in danger. I don't want that in my life. I want nice people. I want people, that I feel safe around. I don't want to be around people that, they want to kill me, or no, thank you.
Do you think they saw your movie?
No, I don't think they have, but.
Sure. Wow. So what advice could you give other youngsters who are in a similar situation?
Get to safety and stay safe, because it's so hard to heal if you're in danger. So hard to heal if you're constantly exposed to someone who's triggering you into a dissociative state, so that you're more vulnerable, and so those dynamics continue. If you have children, protect your children from people who abused you, because they'll try to abuse your children too. I think that's, I want people to, take their own safety seriously, and really, it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to set really big boundaries, because if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. You deserve safety.
So how does a 6 or a 10-year-old know what is safe, or where they can find safety?
Well, if the abuser is their parents, then they're in a difficult situation. It is, some kids try to tell their teachers, but the thing is, what happens when you grow up in an abusive family is oftentimes you don't know any different. You see what happens in your family, and you assume that happens in your friends' families too. You don't know, oh, that actually isn't okay. Adults have such an advantage over children. It's really depressing. So it's like children really, the best thing that they can do is if there's some sort of, the thing is, here in England, there is a wonderful service that's called Childline. But this doesn't exist in the US where I grew up. I'm sure it doesn't exist in a lot of countries, but it is a good model. So I'll just share that model with you. They've done a lot of outreach, And so they have posters in most schools in the UK. There are posters that say, if you ever need to talk about something, you can call Childline. And Childline is confidential, and they won't act on a report until the child asks them to act on it. And the reason I think that's important, even though it's basically, if a child calls and starts to talk about abuse that's happening in their home, then it needs to stay open-ended for a long time, because that child needs to start to build trust with this adult, because they can't trust the adults in their home who they're dependent on for their survival. So to start to trust this other adult, it's actually a slow process. It's a long process. But Childline will keep track of their callers in terms of they're able to connect the calls of this from a particular number or whatever, so that they can kind of have a case file on the child without even knowing the child's name. But they keep this information together, collate the information, so that they can start to build a case if it goes in that direction. So through this process of the child calling, confiding, finding that they can trust the person, they slowly start to realize, okay, that the hotline counselor will try to show the child what their options are, and actually kind of work through, like, well, you could, stay and pretend nothing bad is happening. That's one option. What would happen if you did that? You could call the police. That's another option. What would happen if you did that? And kind of just go through like the different things, like you could make a report to the Child Protection Services. What would happen in that case? So they just kind of go through the options with the child, so the child can kind of rehearse in their head, like, what would happen if I took these different actions, and what's the best choice, what's going to feel comfortable for me, what's the best thing for me to do. And eventually, if the child decides that calling in for child protection is the best option, then they kind of rehearse the call. They talk about how they will do it. And anyway, it just really takes care of the child's needs, putting the child's needs first, instead of sometimes what happens if a child is just scooped out of the home, then or if the abuser is scooped out of the home, oftentimes the abuser will come back to the home. And then what are the repercussions for the child? If the child is taken from the home, then it's like, oh, I'm being punished. No, so that oftentimes they rescind on what they've said, like, oh, no, nothing happened. The year and a half that I've been talking with this counselor, nothing happened. They try to go back on things. And, because they don't want further trauma. But if they have all this support in place, if they have like this continual support and rehearsing the possible outcomes with somebody that they've built trust with, then they have such a better outcome than someone who has this shocking traumatic experience that's sudden and unexpected and feels like everything's out of control and they're being punished. And then the abuser might come and make the abuse much, much worse for them. So it's a really difficult situation for children who are quite young, because their choices are so limited, and they really need adults to advocate for them. And if there aren't any adults in their life to advocate for them, they're really in trouble. They're really vulnerable.
You also speak about how creativity can help the healing process. talk to us about that a little bit?
Well, so trauma is something that when you're in a traumatic situation, your brain actually shuts down the more intellectual parts, like the verbal center of your brain shuts down basically during trauma. So some people find it hard even to scream or say no, or when they're being attacked, because the speech center of the brain shuts down, and it's an instinctual response. It's a physical response, and there's no way to predict if that's going to happen or what. But it also means trauma memory is stored in a much different way than kind of your normal everyday memories. So your normal everyday memories, I got up, I made myself breakfast, had a cup of coffee, you could pretty much you can repeat that back to somebody without too much trouble. But with a traumatic memory, your brain doesn't assimilate the different parts of the experience. So what happens every day with every memory, with every experience, is that your senses bring in all these different stimuli. So you're seeing, for instance, right now I'm sitting in my studio and I see purple leaves on a plant. I smell, a little bit of the kind of a little bit of damp on the wind coming through the crack underneath the door. I can hear a train in the background. There's different things. So it's like these different sort of sensory impressions come in all the time. But what happens is with normal everyday memory, your brain assimilates all of those, synthesizes them, weaves them together, and then puts them into words. So that later you could say, oh, I was sitting in my studio and I, had this interview. But with a traumatic memory, those original sensory impressions, they don't get woven together. They sit in these kind of separate compartments. And so many people, when they are recovering from trauma, if they have flashbacks, sometimes they'll get like a smell of, that bothers them. And the smell might be, for instance, a memory of their abuser's cologne, for instance. Or they might get a flashback where they actually see in full photographic detail the scene itself, which could be very scary. And what it is just it's just your mind trying to put these puzzle pieces back together so that you can assimilate these things again. And it's why trauma survivors also have such a hard time telling people what happened, initially. And because the words just aren't there. The words are kind of like what happens after you're able to kind of assimilate all these things, what happens after. But the process, before that process, you just get these kind of little glimpses of things that sometimes don't make any sense, particularly if you've repressed the original event. So what is really great about just doing any sort of creativity that you might, feel inclined to do or might feel inclined to try, sculpture, music, drawing, anything at all, knitting, whatever it is, what can happen is in the process of creating something, it's allowing your story to come out in a different way that kind of circumvents the problem with trying to put it into words before you have it all woven together in your mind. So it's a great way to process things, even if you don't remember it all the way, if you not even sure what happened, or if you if you just want to go, you do know what happened and you just want to go deeper with it, like, okay, I'm still kind of stuck on this thing that happened, this particular aspect of this thing that happened, why am I still stuck? Then oftentimes if you do something creative, it will really help the part of you that's still kind of stuck, still frozen in that experience, to communicate. And I think what the main, for me, the main, I guess, machinery of healing is basically just witnessing. So it's like these experiences need to be witnessed. And it could be just you alone journaling, so that you are putting these feelings and impressions down on paper so you can see it yourself and say, oh, this is what happened, this is how I was harmed, this is the impact that it's had on my life. So acknowledging and witnessing and just being there, the way you might be there for a good friend, or the way a parent might, care for a child, like, oh, that is so painful, that's so difficult, that's so awful that happened, and what do you need now? So it's a route to self-compassion, and also, eventually, if you feel safe doing it, eventually, if you want to, if you choose to, you could also use it as a tool for outreach, for other people, because there's so many people who maybe don't know about the particular crime that someone has suffered. Maybe they don't understand it. There's still a lot of really kind of primitive ideas out there about women, about survivors, about children, about abuse, and there's a lot of outreach that needs to be done still. And it can give a sense of meaning to communicate, and also to start to open up your personal experience to the world, really, because our communities have, anybody who's suffered a crime like this, their community, you can feel like your community has betrayed you, because who was there when you were being hurt? Who prevented it? Who stopped it? They didn't. People who you wanted to help you didn't help you. They, were the police there? It's like there's ways that you felt abandoned when these things happen. That's kind of like another thing that's another sort of hallmark of trauma, is this feeling of being alone and abandoned in that scenario. So creativity can be used in activism work if you're so inclined, if that's something that you feel could potentially benefit you, because through creativity you can make a metaphor, and that's just this way of having a boundary for yourself, that it's like, I can share this creative thing that I've made, but that's not, I feel that it's about my experience, or about me, or my strength, but it is a piece of art, it's a thing, and other people can relate with it in different ways, and they might get amazing things out of it that you never could have predicted, or they could be critical as well. So it's a way to just have like a little bit of a boundary, so that you can put a thing out there that other people can interact with, that's just not you, that's not your soul, it's not, that wouldn't feel like they're attacking you personally. Well, it can feel like that, but it is something that's separate, and that's a way that you can protect yourself a little bit through doing a creative work. But again, it's like, if you feel like that's what you want to do, And you shouldn't ever feel pressured to share things that you don't feel safe sharing, because listen to your feelings, listen to your gut feeling about it. So
where in your healing journey did your movie come?
Well, I would say at the point where I wanted to do some outreach. Some people have asked, like, oh, are puppets your art therapy? I'm like, not really. but basically, when I was in my 20s, I did do a lot of paintings, which I feel that they were kind of more like my art therapy. So I did a whole bunch of paintings that were really just for me. They were just me trying to process, what had happened to me, like what the kind of emotional ramifications. It was just me trying to communicate with myself, really. So yeah, I did this whole series of paintings, which were really just about my journey. And I did loads and loads and loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of journaling. And I would say that's probably another kind of form of art therapy, where I was just processing and processing. But puppetry was more kind of like, well, I've kind of actually built up quite a few skills just from doing all this sort of work that's just for me. And now I want to do something that's kind of for the world. And so Hooray for Hollywood was really, I would say it was me wanting to be, like when I was a kid, I felt like, well, why didn't anybody stand up for me? Why didn't anybody step in? People saw glimpses of what was happening. There were loads of teachers at school who, I'm sure it was very clear that I was being abused. I had bruises all over. It's like, I'm sure it was very clear. And so many of them were just like, oh, I didn't see anything. People, it's hard because it's like teachers, they shouldn't also have to be social workers. But, on the other hand, it's like, here's an adult who's working with this child, 5 days a week.
So where can people get a copy? Where can they get to see this movie?
Well, because Hooray for Hollywood is autobiographical, the way that I present it is not making it available for everyone online, but actually through, I do presentations with it. So I don't really, it's intense to watch, like it's emotionally intense to watch. So I don't think it's good to just put it online and have people watch it and then immediately just shut down afterwards. Because what I want to do with Hooray for Hollywood is have conversations in community so that people can see other people who are watching this. They can see other people are witnessing this. And so they have this feeling of support from other people to be brave enough to stay present afterwards and then to engage in this conversation. Because I always facilitate a post-show discussion so that people know, like, well, for one, I did survive it, I got away. And then also, like, how is healing possible? How can you manage trauma? Because everybody has trauma, especially after this past year. But, everybody has trauma, but there's no trauma education, like it's not taught in schools, like, how do you manage your post-traumatic stress from whatever it is you may have suffered. There just isn't really that much information out there. People don't have basic skills around it. So, I feel like, well, I know lots of things about that, and I'm happy to share. And also, I just want to kind of help frame things in a way so that people can understand that they personally can help to stop these crimes and prevent these crimes. and that they can help protect children, and that they can, I just want to give people hope and empowerment that they also can, whatever terrible thing might have happened to you, you can go forward. You can, if you accept the reality of what's happened to you and process the impact that that's had on you, the future is yours and you can be free.
If you can have a billboard on the side of the road, what would you have on your billboard?
Oh no, that's hard. Well, probably what I just said, that whatever's, oh no, that's hard. I might have to write it down, send it to you. I think you deserve to have, I think you deserve to have a life that matches the quality of your spirit.
Very good, very good. Raven, how can people get hold of you?
Well, my website's probably the easiest. It's just ravenkaliana.com.
You know, I've got a program called Be Brave with the objective of eradicating bullying and harassment and sexual abuse. What does the word brave mean to you?
Well, I would say brave is when you see that something's scary, threatening, and you kind of size up your own strengths and approach it in a way. You might be taking a bit of a risk, but you feel that your skills and support are up for the challenge.
Okay. Well, Raven, you've had such an awful, dreadful childhood. It's fantastic to see how well you've recovered and that you are reaching out and supporting others. And my heart goes to you, and we are grateful for you, and we are grateful that you survived and you managed to escape that dreadful snuff movie that they were making. I just admire you so much, and I'm so grateful that you've come out and shared this story as a warning to other people, and giving tips and advice on not only how the victim can manage it, but how we as observers should get involved, not be bystanders, to actually notice those bruises, notice those unhappy children, and step in and do something about it.
Yes.
Because it happens right under our noses. Would you like to leave any last word for our listeners?
Oh dear. I would say just look towards your own strengths, and also find the support that you need to go forward, because everybody always thinks that they're alone. Whatever it is that they have to deal with in their lives, they always think they're alone. And that's because the perpetrators tried to isolate you. And you're not alone. Here we all are, we want to help. Your friends want to help you, your family, maybe, depending on who they are. But, there are always people around who care. And there are millions of other people who have had similar experiences and who can, share about their own journey, or share advice, or, just lots of stuff on YouTube, look around. Here we all are. We want to change things. If you want to change things, we'll help you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And I invite our listeners, you can all contact me on my webpage, walkingwithoutskin.com, and I offer a free 30-minute coaching session where we can discuss your journey of healing. And I invite everybody out there to fly free.
Thank you for listening to Walking Without Skin. We would love your feedback, opinions, suggestions, and ratings. Please share this podcast far and wide to encourage more people to share their stories with vulnerability and authenticity.